chemicals are more prevalent in non-smokers. 2 were equal in non-smokers. No, 2 were equal in non-smokers and smokers. Only 3 of the 15 chemicals were higher in the smokers. 50% of those tested had concentrations over the average of the United States, and you can't say what caused it. Page 4. We could not identify with any degree of certainty a source for all the exposures. Now I would like to read to you a legal definition. Fraud is generally defined in the law as an intentional misrepresentation of material existing fact made by one person to another with knowledge of its falsity and for the purpose of inducing the other person to act, and upon which the other person relies with resulting injury or damage. My question, I want to know who wrote that sentence about how it was not attributable to gas processing when you had only 3 medians to prove correlation and no air samples. Who wrote that sentence claiming you proved the null hypothesis when you know you didn't?
Again, our conclusions are based upon the samples that we collected the weekend we were out there. They represent a point-in-time measurement. It's a one-time sampling. We're going to keep an eye on the air monitoring data, and if we see seasonal variations and can find more funding to do an additional investigation, we're more than willing to come back out here and look at it some more. What we were looking for, again, was commonality. Looking to all the most or all the people we tested have higher levels. And yes, 50% of the people had higher levels, but the chemical that was higher varied from person to person. Not all 50% of the people had the same compounds that were higher. One person had one compound, another person had a different compound. It was very scattered of what compounds were elevated.
Hi, I agree with everyone here, but my concern is y'all didn't test any of the children. What about the children who are preemies, who have weak immune systems to start off in life with? You know, 5 years down the road, who's to say y'all don't come back with another study that says, oh yeah, it did affect these children. Are children going to be covered? You know, are they going to be protected? Because there was no study done on these kids. I have 2 that are born preemie. I was born a preemie. I mean, my health is at risk, but I'm looking at my kids' kids, can they pass the toxins on in their bloodstream to their kids? So, you know, why wasn't the kids tested too?
And we would have liked to look at children, but because we didn't have anything compared to, we wouldn't know what those levels would represent. I mean, yes, they might have had detectable levels, but most kids in the United States probably do have some detectable levels based on what we see in adults. So we wouldn't know if they're higher level of exposure or not, because we don't have anything to compare it to.
Okay, well, you know, there's a medical field that you can talk to, I'm sure, find out levels of children, or talk to anybody in the medical field to compare that to. I mean,
Toiling is okay in a premature baby.
Well, and we
we have studies of lead poisoning in children, so why don't we have the studies of this in children?
because for lead we have a standard of which no child should be above a certain level in their blood. Those values don't exist for volatile organic compounds in the blood.
I don't understand that you even say that, because you say that we can get this from inhaling gas fumes, we can get this from tobacco fumes. Well, our children are exposed to gas fumes and tobacco fumes, so if they can get it from that, how can they not get it from this?
They could. It's possible.
Thank you.
How many of the TDSHS staff tested in the top 5% of the percentile?
I'd have to go back and look at the numbers.
Of the TDSHS staff.
There's 5 of you.
None of us were above.
No, we did have.
Do you have one?
I didn't catch it in the report if you did.
It was in table 2, and the only thing that we were above were the dibromochloromethane. But we did have several other compounds that were detected. But that was both pre-trip and post-trip, so after we had spent several days here.
this gas well over here in 97, I think it went on in 98. I started becoming ill as more and more and more gas wells got stuck in around my house. Starting in 2001, I began going to doctors. I have been to neurologists, I have been to allergists, I have been to the ENT. I have had brain scans, I have had wires glued to my head. I have had all kinds of medical testing done trying to explain why every time they would release, I would become very ill. Every time I would go to church, suddenly chemicals in the air at church, I started becoming more sensitive to that. But it started here at home. I am a housewife. I have not worked outside of the house in 20 years. I sit over there in that house, and my exposure outside that house is limited to grocery shopping and church, and occasionally some outdoor festivals. I do not drive. I do not pump gas. I've pumped gas twice in my life. I do not smoke. I never drive. I did not grow up in a smoking household, and neither did my husband. So why are you able to say, when they took all this information and they wrote it down on their paperwork when they took my samples, and I get this little paperback telling me that my urine has things in it it shouldn't, why are you able to say that you don't know where this could come from when every other possible source of my problem has been eliminated? There's nothing left. We are the ones with the whole house water filter. Why? Because my health was so bad, I could not get up and walk from my bed to my toilet. We got that whole house water filter, and my health started improving. My health started improving to the fact where about 25% of the time, I didn't need my mask. If I go into a restaurant, they usually have enough air circulation because of restaurant kitchen smells that I can sit there. I can't come over here and sit because people wear colognes and they wear deodorants. I can't even use soap anymore because it has stuff in it that makes me sick. I have to make my own stupid soap. So you tell me how the miner's canary over here is not getting sick from exposures to things because there's nothing else for it to be now.
Well, it's extremely difficult to link environmental exposures to some health effects. Most health conditions, diseases, cancer, birth defects, and all the different kinds of health conditions have a number of potential sources, and many of those aren't even known at this point. So it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to link environmental exposures to health effects. And the data that we collected was biological data. We asked about certain health concerns to see if there was some kind of pattern or trend, but we cannot use the biological data alone to determine what the risks are potential health effects.
Okay, this, maybe it's just because it affects my concentration. It really isn't making sense to me. It's like you're saying that you needed to study apples and you specifically went out and studied oranges instead. It's not comprehending.
We were asked to look at the biological samples and said that's what we did. We came out and took biological samples to see if people have higher levels of compounds in their bodies.
And I did in my urine, and I did have not above normal in my blood, but considering the fact that I could take one Benadryl and be asleep for 72 hours instead of just 4, I overreact to things. And I don't think that there certainly were not questions in the paperwork that asked anything about the health of the person to see if they tended normally or abnormally to be oversensitive when they took chemicals or took any kind of other exposures to things. So when I can just have one little whiff of somebody walking past me